All right, as stated, going to be a little bit longer explanation here, going through most of the questions as I go. Still going to try and be as brief as I can, but I know people might maybe kind of want more. So this first page here, right, is on demographic info, and really just trying to see some different buckets of information based on roles and things for coaches, because we don't want to overlook different groups and or see that really one kind of area or group is kind of pushing everything, like trying to make sure we're understanding the needs of coaches across the state. So really trying to look at what do you describe your role as: head coach, assistant volunteer, or other, to kind of help us kind of see that vision as we're going. What do you see on your team from year to year, right? Knowing that you may or may not have girls or boys some years, but do you typically see boys and girls most years? Are you pretty much a boys only team or coach? Are you pretty much a girls only team or coach? That'll kind of help with that. How would you best kind of see your school, right? Large schools, Division 1 schools, or some of those bigger Division 2 schools, maybe the ones that float on the line or not. Some of those lower Division 2 schools, like the lower half, all of Division 3, small schools, right, pretty much being Division 4. And then your school's location, right? Really just kind of went with our regions. Just pick the area that you think best identifies where your school is at. I know some schools might be like, we're kind of on the fence or this or that. It's okay. Again, it just helps give us a general idea. And then kind of a different one, right? But this may kind of help when we're looking at some of our different areas and things. How do you see your program, right, over the last 5 years, 10 years, right? Do you see yourself as like a top 10% of all of our schools, top 20% in your own division, top 50, lower 50 in your division? Or again, you can even prefer not to answer that one. I know that's kind of tough for a lot of us, but again, this would help us understand where some of our input and data is coming from. Doesn't make any data more important than others. It's really just where it's coming from. A few questions on girls wrestling. One of the big ones, right, is the idea of like how we're scoring the postseason events and what that should look like. And so again, this question's been out there a little bit, but really trying to get more data on this. Essentially, do you think that there should only be one wrestler per team per weight that earns points? That doesn't mean entered. It's just talking about point scoring alone, and kind of looking at that. Overall, how do you feel that the girls' postseason process was from one year to the next? What's the likelihood that you think you might schedule some female-only duels next year? And then what are some other things out there that you think that the MWA or otherwise could be doing to help support and grow girls wrestling in your area or the state as a whole? So here's some of our preliminary concepts. Again, the first video I talked about these a little bit. The weigh-in formats. These are all things that have been input from coaches and or otherwise, like just either proposals or part of proposals they've had. A lot goes into really making a formal proposal before we get that to the MHSAA to get by the rep council and other things. That's why we're really trying to use this. This is really meant to be a lot of feedback discussion. We are primarily trying to look at how this impacts the varsity side of things, knowing that we may have some exceptions or exclusionary causes for JV events. And there might even be some things we have to, adapt or adjust for Sunday events or girls competitions. Trying to figure out how do we meet the needs of all. So the first, kind of concept, essentially has been a proposal somewhat in the past, but it's the idea that we're just going to move away from home weigh-ins going to on-site weigh-ins. Everything on site always, again, primarily looking at varsity with this. The second one would be having on-site weigh-ins, but like maybe not all the time. Maybe there's set dates for it. Maybe there's a number that you have to make or a different system. Again, this is something that probably needs some fine-tuning based on what the support from coaches are on this. So some flexible weigh-ins. This has been one that's been kicked around a little bit. I know there are some leagues that do similar things like this with their duels and stuff like that. But it's the idea that there's no night before weigh-ins for the most part, but it would really just be a day of weigh-in. It's really trying to look at those maybe weekday competitions to start. It could be the weekends too. I know that looks different, is different. There's further travel with that. So that is something that we are talking more on, but it's the idea of like moving away from a lot of the day before to a flexible day of weigh-in to give a more realistic alignment to like an on-site, but not necessarily forcing that full on-site. And then the last concept deals more around like the alpha, the certification, and maybe some just transparency and advocacy. on that, and it's verification of your lowest weight on site. So still having a home weighing procedure after you've had an on-site weight verification that you could use. And then if you are going to verify for a new weight, right, because you're moving down, that would also have to be on site. I think there would be a lot of pieces that have to be discussed and really kind of teased out on this to make clear of what it looks like. But it could offer a lot of transparency and stuff for coaches and the alpha process and things moving forward. But again, not sure. They're just concepts that have been out there. So the second one's really looking at team seating. There is quite a bit, I think, at the table to talk about, look at with these. They are kind of wordy as we look at these down here, but I did try very hard to make sure that we're encompassing what they're trying to do without putting everything in there. And our final proposal would be pretty clear if we have one coming out of these of what it is, where it is, why it is, right? So this first one here is pretty similar to what I'm going to say is the current football model, where we're not looking to change the geographic boundaries of the teams within a team regional, but it could obviously adjust where they are competing within that team regional, on their districts, right? So we're not really breaking the overall geographic boundary, but maybe shifting where teams are at. Again, very similar to what football is doing. Still following the same set up early season formats and process that's already been there of who the hosts are, where things are at, all of that. There would be a seeding process on that. Again, this one right now, preliminary concepts looks at using our current coaching association and a committee or group to kind of seed that within each district and region. It would take place a couple weeks prior to give time to prepare for that, to look at those things, and also to allow enough of the season to kind of build what that process would be. Normal seeding criteria, would be applied into that. So it would be kind of nothing different. We're not trying to break the mold on that. Then they would be placed. Again, essentially it would be placed 1, 2, and 3 would each be in their own separate district. 4 and 5 would be placed together in the same district. And so that's where some of that shifting may happen, right? If 1 and 2 are schools right next to each other, then they may now be in separate districts, right? With some slight shifting, but we're not sending them all across the state or anything like that. And then non-seeded teams would be grouped into those remaining districts based on closest geographic boundaries, just like they've been in the past. And then that could carry over into the regional structure, right? Where instead of the highest district, lowest district number kind of seed that's there, but then we'll go into an actual seeding system, right? 1 versus the 4 or 5 district, and then 2 and 3 versus each other. Winners move out. Main rationale behind that, right, is, to try to give the best teams in the state the chance to kind of show that performance and reward that, while also allowing, right, those local levels still to kind of compete for their district titles and stuff without really breaking those boundaries too much. The other concept, this is, like I said before, closer to the lacrosse model. And we are potentially breaking geographic boundaries here and shifting teams outside of a regional or further based on where things are at. Again, this is really kind of looking at trying to the coaching group kind of looking at this and working with this is trying to create their words, right? A fair, transparent, competitive postseason pathway for team regionals in each division while preserving some of the logistical feasibility and trying not to disrupt too much of the process we already have in place. Again, it does acknowledge that it's pretty close or mirrors practices used in other sports and try to avoid late stage manipulation for postseason assignments. Right? They have some guiding principles to it. Still, early season, nothing changes. And there's some early posting, some ideas, kind of what's there. And then there's kind of a seating authority and timeline that kind of puts these things in place to go. For the most part, this is taking into consideration top 8 teams, right? Ranking by division, talking about how do we rank them, right? And then essentially the big thing would be separating those top 8 teams. So if you had, team, the first ranked team, second ranked team, and fifth ranked team are all literally right next to each other. They potentially could all be in separate team regionals, right? Because they would have to kind of be moved out based on this, right? Um, the, the travel, for the most part, the burden of that travel will be placed on those top teams for the majority of that travel, knowing that yes, one of those other ones might get shifted a little bit, right, for what their travel is, but they wouldn't be shifted like hundreds of miles or things like that. Hosting assignments, right, it would still be one of the things that have to get worked out. And then how do we kind of like overlook and work through that? Again, this is a piece that's fairly well got a lot to it, but could be quite a bit more discussion for it. Every year we ask questions, right? Should we keep the home weighing system or not? And try and get our coaches' feedback on that. And we use that to determine where that should be or how should we look for that. Again, looking at the postseason like process for girls overall. We're always trying to make sure we're doing that the right thing and improving whether we are or aren't. And then really like individual seating's been something that's come up quite a bit more. So just saying like, hey, how do we feel like the individual seating's been going overall throughout your season? Positive, not positive, consistent. Just trying to keep a feel for that and what we may or may not have to do. So looking specifically at the individual postseason, there's a few different pieces here, right, that we're trying to see where coaches sit at. One of them is not just the idea of, like before we talked about the girls, right, one entry per team per weight for scoring, but do we just go to similar to the more national model that boys or girls doesn't really matter. Every weight class, every school only gets one entry per weight. So no more double entries and stuff like that. So it'd just be one entry per weight across the board. And kind of how you feel about that. Whether or not you found the adjusted start time for the individual regionals, remember it was an hour later this year than the previous year, that was helpful or not to your team or beneficial in some fashion. Please know, like for that additional hour kind of flex time shifted, it did come from coaches asking for that, their input, the bad weather, the schools, there's a lot that kind of played into that on why that was done. But still want to get the feedback. Hey, how do you think it was? Was it helpful? Was it not? Same thing for girls, right? Having theirs an hour later, right? Is it still beneficial or not? Knowing that some schools have to travel quite a bit from where their boys region might be to the girls, but coaches doing both. How you felt the overall experience of the individual finals were compared to the previous year. And then what are some areas you think we really need to look at for updates, changes, or improvements with the individual finals? Again, check whichever you kind of think needs to be there. If there's something else, please put it. Knowing that some of these things are within our control and some of them are not, but that doesn't mean we're not addressing them or bringing them up or pushing on them. So if there are things you're like, hey, we really need to look at this some more, or this continues to be a focus, please state that. Not sure why that's on there twice, so I'll make sure that's adjusted. Do you believe that the MHSA should separate public and private schools for postseason teams? This has been a national kind of debate more as things are going. So it's really just trying to get your feel and look at that for public versus private. Completely a separated structure, not at all, stay where we're at. Trying to look at those things. Do you believe, again, we're looking at just team stuff here, that the team postseason, right, should a team be in the state finals consecutively multiple times in years in a row, or is consistently somewhere? Should they be automatically opted up a division? So if a team wins the division 4 title, right, 3 times in a row, should they go up to D3? And so on and so forth. Essentially like a promotion type model. Do you believe the MHSA team regional format should be designed to consistently produce the best state finals matchup possible? In other words, the regional's job is to get our best teams to the state, and not having them knocked out too early in the process. Do you believe that our current format does produce our best possible state format finals? Do you think the geography outweighs competitive fairness? Does it matter more about where you live, or does competitive fairness matter more? So if you live in a really good area, we need to spread that out, or a really like competitive area for wrestling. And if you live in an area that maybe that competitive is not as much, schools would get pushed into that area. In your opinion, right, should the best teams in the state have a protected path, meaning they don't meet before the team finals weekend, right? So you don't have like your number one and number two teams seeing each other in districts, and they're not seeing each other in regionals. They're kind of separated. Doesn't mean they can't get knocked off by somebody else, but our known best teams are kind of separated. How important do you think it is to avoid having two of the top four teams meeting in the regional semifinals, so before the regional finals, right? Would you support separating our top 8 teams into 8 different team regionals, right? If 2 of the top 8 teams are assigned to the same team regional under our current format, should we be reassigning them? So if there's 2 of them in that, and we know that, should we shift one out to not have that happen? Do you believe that a seeded system would improve the fairness of our postseason team competition? Right? Is seeding a potential fix to what could be an equity or fairness issue out there? Would the top 8 separation system make our team finals more meaningful and more competitive as a whole? Right? Again, this is from your standpoint as a coach and your point of view. And then, as we look at this, right, do you trust an outside group or system that would create a ranking system that we could use that would serve as a postseason seeding tool? That could be something like Michigan Grappler, Rank Wrestler, RPI, or otherwise. It would just be something out of our control of the MHSA and or the MWA that is essentially, an outside entity, no strings attached. Hey, this is what it should be. And then, if we were to use a ranking system, whether it's a partial use, just a baseline use or whatnot, what would be your preference, right? 5 being highest, or 1 being highest, 5 being lowest, right? Just a normal computer-based rankings, that's like an RPI, coaches committee rankings, MHSA committee rankings, grappler or similar, right, type rankings, and then statewide coaches vote. Do you think if we published those seeding rankings on the 3rd Monday of January, would that be early enough for schools to prepare for an adjusted postseason if that were to happen? Would you accept increased travel if it created more balanced and fair postseason brackets, right? So you as your school, yes, you're okay to do it whether you're a top 8 ranked team or not. Yep, you would be okay to do it, but only if you're a ranked team, not if you're unranked. No, you don't think that's something you would be in favor of no matter what. If your team benefited competitively from reassignment, would you be willing to host a regional on shorter notice if your facilities allow it? So if we have that realignment system and you're the team that's benefiting from that, basically saying that you are willing to be a host, knowing that, hey, we're moving, this helps us, and somebody's got to step up to the plate. Do you think our state has enough statewide parity that justifies having a regional seeding system? And then, which system do you think best reflects your understanding of what a statewide championship should be or should mean in Michigan? Our current system that we have in place, where we only seed once we get to team state, best reflects the state championship for Michigan. Full bracket seeding, meaning separating the top 16 teams starting all the way back down in districts. Not 16 from the districts, but just 16 across the state. A full finals bracket seeding, right? That's a top 8 seeding separating the top 8. That is similar to that earlier concept that was talked about. That's one of the top 8 teams per regional. A partial top 8 seeding, right? And again, that's just making sure that only one of the top 4 is in it per regional, right? Or should we go to a strict geographic place placement, right? Similar to our current system, but almost kind of getting away from the seeding at a team state also. It's just purely, this is where you're at, this is your path, this is the random draw, and that would better represent what a state championship should be. If we were to go to some type of a seeding system or a separation system, would you support a 2-year trial period, right? Not just putting it on the books indefinitely, but saying like, hey, we're going to roll this out, we're going to see what it looks like, see how our sport takes to it or not. And then what are some of your concerns, right? 1 being a high concern, 5 being a low concern when it comes to seeding. Excessive travel, hosting and the complications with that, lack of transparency of that seeding process, the premature elimination of top teams or non-competitive teams showing up at the team state finals. Meaning, again, number one and number two met each other in the regional semifinals, right? Or well, I'll go very extreme, right? Somehow a team makes it to the team state finals and they've won 4 duels all year. And realistically, there is 30 other teams in their division that have and would beat them on any given day, but they made the state finals because of their geography. And then the last one is the reduced representation of different areas of the state. So going to a seating system would really benefit certain areas, but then would unfairly harm other areas of the state for no other reasons outside of their control. And then if there's any other concerns that you have, right, please list those. For the clinic stuff, right, it's always good to know what you guys kind of need, want, or would work with. So anything you think that should be there or other ideas, please let that come our way so we can get that built into you. And we'll go from there. Again, I told you this was going to be a little bit longer. I apologize. Again, this is a springboard of the conversations. I expect there'll be more from this. And it might even be a case where you are in favor of some things the way they were worded here. But as we get down the line and it's developed more teeth and more meat to what that could look like, you might not be in favor of the way it's getting rolled out, and that's okay. We're not going to go back and really hold anybody to it and say, well, hey, on this early survey, everybody said they liked this, but now that they've seen it, nobody likes it. That's not really what we're intending to do. It's just to kind of start giving us in the right direction and start to kind of drive the conversations. Reach out to reps, other coaches. I hope this creates conversation. It's really what this is meant to be, just to try to make it better for everybody.